I'm Bob Schiller. I have the pleasure of introducing this Oken lecture, Lawrence Summers. I wanted to say first that the Oken lecture series was funded by an anonymous donor in honor of Arthur Oken, who was professor of economics here at Yale, who later became chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, who founded, with William Brainerd, the Brookings Papers on Economic Activity, and was widely admired both here at Yale and around the world as an economist that has had a lot of impact on policy, an economist with a purpose. So it's altogether fitting that we have Lawrence Summers here as our Oken lecturer for this year. Larry Summers, I go through his career briefly. He started out at age 16 at MIT as a physics major. Fortunately for us, he switched into economics as a teenager. He got his PhD at Harvard. He got tenure at Harvard at he's one of the earliest in age, at age 28. In 1993, he won the John Bates Clark Medal for the best economist under the age of 40. He joined the staff of the Council of Economic Advisors. He was Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs. He was chief economist at the World Bank. He was the U.S. Secretary of Treasury. He was president of Harvard University. And now he is a university professor at Harvard and also a director at D.E. Shaw.
It is interesting to note that in recent years, financial crises have become pervasive. One always remembers the comments one makes about economic fluctuations that prove to be prescient and forgets the ones that prove to have been completely wrong. And I am no exception. So I will recall that I was fond of observing in 2005 and 2006 that if one looked at the last 20 years, there had been six major financial crises. The 1987 stock market crash, the 1990 savings and loan real estate crash, the 1995 Mexican crash. Some would argue that if this is a U.S. list, that Mexico doesn't belong. One could have that argument. The 1997 Asian financial crisis, the events associated with LTCM and Russia that President Clinton and Secretary Rubin at the time labeled the most serious financial crisis since the Second World War, and the 2001 financial crisis associated with the bursting of the tech bubble, problems in the high-yield sector, of where the subsequent problems in capital markets exemplified by what happened at Enron. It is interesting to ask the question whether there is some relation between all these events. Because what I've suggested so far is that if one distinguishes the last generation from the preceding generation, in the preceding generation, financial crises were relatively rare. Business cycles were caused by the Federal Reserve eliminating Federal Reserve's concern about inflation. For the last generation, business cycles have been associated with financial crisis, and the Federal Reserve has not caused downturns through its concern with inflation. How are these events linked? I'm not entirely sure. Sitting in the Brookings Papers meetings for all these years, I've learned how Bill Nordhaus is hard to satisfy. Sometimes people have t-statistics of 3, and Bill pronounces them to be quote-unquote Darwinian, and reflecting the data mining of the author, and on other occasions they have only a few observations, in which case they're deemed to have committed one observation, econometrics. I'm going to commit about 4 observation econometrics and offer the hypothesis that the right way to understand this pattern is that we achieved that Art's generation and then Paul Volcker achieved a hugely important thing. They achieved a measure of credibility and commitment to non-inflationary monetary policies that enabled inflation expectations to be kept in check, and that just as success in curing infectious disease leads there to be far more cancer than there was before infectious disease was brought in check, so too the achievement of disinflation leads to an economy in which expansions are enabled to continue until they lead to the complacency and confidence associated with financial crisis. Perhaps we will have 6% inflation 2 years from now, and the Fed will find it necessary to engineer a recession, and this theory will fall completely by the wayside. Perhaps there is an alternative, more compelling explanation for this pattern. But for now, I would adduce the hypothesis that the increased incidence of financial crisis and the closer relationship between financial crisis and economic downturns is a byproduct of our success in achieving low and credible inflation and the associated great moderation. Whether or not we can accept that idea as to why financial crisis seems to have been the cause of previous recessions where it was not previously, the empirical observation stands that financial crises are frequent, and that not infrequently, when there is a financial crisis, it leads to some significant disruption in real economic activity. It follows that the causes of financial crisis, the policy response to financial crisis, need to occupy a larger part of our consideration of macroeconomics than they have traditionally. I should suggest also that this conclusion is reinforced by the observation that whereas disinflation recession lends itself very much to the unfortunate conservation argument I presented at the beginning that suggested that you couldn't really alter the output gap over long periods of time if you did not want to accept changes in inflation. it is easy to understand financial crisis and the associated downturns in output as a reduction in aggregate supply, and therefore highly plausible to believe that the better management of financial crisis or the prevention of financial crisis will lead not just to a smoother path of output, but a path that, by avoiding downturns, has a higher average over long periods of time, and therefore is more successful in achieving the goal that Art Oken and Jim Tobin and Yale for many, many years set for macroeconomic policy of raising the average level of output. Now, discussions of financial crisis tend to have the character of accident investigations. There are many different suspects. Great numbers of details are mustered to tell the story. There are always particular words associated with particular financial crises. One talks about portfolio insurance in the context of the 1987 crash. One talks about Tessabonos in the context of the Mexican experience. One talks about bubble psychology in the context of the NASDAQ experience. One uses one speaks about the vicissitudes of the separation between the originators and the owners of mortgages in talking about the current subprime mortgage crisis.